It started with a simple game of ping pong. In 1971, a match between the two nations paved the way for Richard Nixon to visit China, the first US president to do so since the country's communist revolution in 1949.
Nixon went to China essentially wanting to ease tension between China and the United States and get the Chinese to help, if not proactively, at least passively, for the Americans to get out of the Vietnam War. It happened at a time when the Chinese situation itself was not terribly good in terms of the domestic politics, being the tail end of the Cultural Revolution.
Since 1979, when the US acknowledged the One China policy, according to which Taiwan and Tibet are considered to be part of China, tensions between the two major global powers have fluctuated.
It is possible to say that the relationship between China and the United States had spells of hot and cold, but I would probably put it in a slightly different way, because what we have really seen was a fairly consistent American commitment to help China to modernize and move away from the old-fashioned communist way of doing things.
The transfer of technology, investment and trade benefited both the US and China. But there were times when the relationship was difficult. None more so than in 1989, when the Tiananmen Square protests turned violent.
Fundamentally, the two governments, the two countries, do not believe in the same basic values. And when events like Tiananmen Square happened, meant a China that was progressively developing in the right direction towards greater democratization was suddenly making an abrupt turn.
And I now call on the Chinese leadership publicly, as I have in private channels, to avoid violence and to return to their previous policy of restraint.
That's why we had a situation where Bush had to go through a back channel to reach out to the Chinese just to ascertain what's going on. Is this going to be a real turn back?
This just in, we have unconfirmed reports this morning that a plane has crashed into one of the towers of the World Trade Center.
After the 9/11 attacks in 2001, the two countries managed to find common ground. While the US were focused on leading the war on terror, the Chinese government saw the opportunity to align themselves as a friend of the United States in fighting terrorism. Beijing focused its attention on Muslims in Xinjiang province in the far west of the country.
The Americans were so focused with the Middle East that it enabled China to continue to project its soft power in ways that it otherwise could not have been able to do. So on that particular occasion, I think Chinese diplomacy was beautifully played out.
Following on from Bush's tentative but amicable approach, President Obama was as friendly as could be expected towards China.
Obama went out of his way to be friendly with the Chinese authorities. I think it was in his first official visit to China, he would have a town hall meeting in Shanghai, and that would be broadcast live on Chinese television. And when he arrived, he was then told that, yes, Mr. President, of course, the town hall meeting will take place on CCTV Channel 9, which is the English-only channel, which means that hardly any Chinese citizens would watch it. I don't see anything like that happening with President Trump.
The election of Donald Trump, who questioned China's growing international influence throughout his election campaign, could transform the relationship.
But a lot would depend on the personal chemistry between the two men. They are very special individuals. If they cannot get along, I suspect that neither of them will be too hesitant to show that. This is still the single most important bilateral relationship in the world. And whether the United States and the Chinese government agree or not on basic policies and values, they have to work together in a constructive way. Otherwise, the world will face a crisis that none of us would want it ever to materialize.